Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of this symposium, the APCS International Symposium, Climate Security in the Asia Pacific under a Shifting Geopolitical Context. We have simultaneous interpretation available. If you prefer Japanese, please select the Japanese language from the interpretation button in your Zoom window. このシンポジウムは日本語の同時通訳を用意しております。日本語で視聴したい方は Zoom ウィンドウ下の通訳ボタンをクリックし、日本語をお選びください。First, let me start again by thanking you for joining to this event co-hosted by IGES and the Institute for Future Initiatives of the University of Tokyo. If you would like to see the details, please click on the link of today's program in your Zoom chat box, which is being shared just now. My name is Guillermo Torres. I'm part of the public relations team of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, IGES, and it is my great pleasure to be your moderator today again. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. Firstly, and due to time constraints, please be aware that we cannot collect questions from the audience. Secondly, by the end of the event, a short survey will appear onto your screen when you close the Zoom window. We would be most grateful if you could take the time to answer it, as we really appreciate your feedback. Finally, the presentation materials and recording of the symposium will be uploaded on the symposium webpage in about a week. So please make sure to check it out if you're interested. Today, we're broadcasting again from the University of Tokyo, and we gather experts from across fields and countries to discuss climate security from different angles and perspectives. We truly hope that these sessions are useful for you. So without further ado, let's begin. Today, we would like to start with the intervention of Mr. Masashi Tsuraka, who is Deputy Director of Strategic Operations in IGES, for a reflection on day one and outline of today's agenda. Mr. Tsuraka, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Guillermo-san. Good afternoon and also good morning, maybe in a different place of the world, because I know that this symposium is joined by many people from all over the world. And on behalf of IGES, I would appreciate your interest and high commitments to this symposium. Okay, so I'm tasked to deliver some reflections of day one yesterday and a little outline of day two today. So yesterday we started with a keynote speech by Dr. Osamu Mizuno, and I briefly introduced, his theory on the climate security. So he pointed out that climate change is increasingly recognized as a systemic security challenge that cannot be adequately addressed through existing nation-based site-specific like UNFCCC mitigation adaptation frameworks. And there is a necessity of a new systemic-oriented policy approach, such as climate socioeconomic hazards, CSEH, to capture transnational and cascading risks. He explained much more on his theory, but in a nutshell, he emphasized that the need to move beyond fragmented, slogan-driven climate security discourse toward the disciplined, evidence-based policy domain grounded in rigorous research, regional cooperation, and institutional clarity in order to effectively manage complex climate security risks and contribute to long-term regional and global stability. Then we moved on to thematic session one, which was entitled Evolving Energy Security under Shifting Climate and the Geopolitical Order. Professor Merling made a presentation on the global energy landscape being reshaped by a great power competition, especially between the United States and China. U.S. energy policy is increasingly driven by national security concerns, while China's dual approach leverages both coal and massive investment in renewable energy. And Dr. Janardhanan pointed out, while the energy transition is commonly viewed as a solution to climate change, renewable energy systems are themselves highly exposed to climate risks. Without embedding resilience measures in infrastructure and planning, The transition could backfire, causing energy insecurity and a political backlash in vulnerable countries. With the guiding questions from Dr. Tamura, the speakers discussed the lack of integration of climate risks into global critical mineral supply chain governance. Also, they discussed on policy implications to Japan, as Japan can be a potential stabilizer in the region's fragmented energy transition landscape. Then we moved on to thematic number 2, which was human mobility and immobility in the context of climate change. How should policymakers understand and address it? It started with Professor Mohammed Nasif Hassan from Cornell University shared his observation that 70% of surveyed coastal households in Bangladesh choose not to migrate despite being exposed to recurrent climate shocks. And he found out that staying in one place under climate risk is often a deliberate, informed strategy, not merely the result of poverty, immobility, or lack of options. And Ms. Fukuda explained that climate mobility includes a spectrum of movements such as voluntary migration, forced displacement, planned relocation, and immobility. And she drew our attention to Fiji's example of planned relocation. Dr. Noguchi introduced the Tuvalu example. When Tuvaluans migrated without communal space in Australia, the loss of agency and place tended to lead to emotional insecurity and disempowerment and the identity crises. In the discussion, they discussed youth as a cross-cutting strategic actor in climate mobility dynamics. Youth are often the most mobile group, yet also the primary carriers of cultural continuity and innovation. After that discussion, we moved on to thematic session number 3, redefining food security toward a climate resilient and a people-centered framework. Based on the food security team's research, Dr. Kuroshima argued that the traditional 4 pillars of food security, which is availability, access, and stability, and the utilization, is not sufficient for capturing the realities of climate change, as it focuses narrowly on caloric intake rather than the ground level resilience. So her team introduced a new definition of food security by adding pillars of agency, sustainability, and resilience to move beyond the short-term adaptation towards long-term systemic resilience. Professor Hussain noted that while absolute food shortages might be avoided through imports, climate change acts as a silent threat by disrupting traditional rainfall and the temperature patterns, forcing farmers into high-risk crop switching. And then Professor Sayamol emphasized that small-scale farmers must be repositioned not as a passive aid recipients, but as active agents essential to global food system sustainability, supported by legal protections for their rights to land and water. They concluded that the pursuit of food security must be conducted through a people-centered approach that safeguards the dignity and security of food producers, ensuring no one is left behind. Then a kind of concluding session of plenary number 2 in the day 1, which was development and peace building sector and the climate change, integrated programming and project development. While speakers, including myself, this session identified a shift from a traditional hard security toward an integrated framework where environmental stability and the protection of livelihoods are recognized as fundamental components of regional peace. Dr. Lucas Rutinger, another speaker, advocated for breaking down institutional silos between climate adaptation and peace building. He stressed that programming must be both conflict sensitive and climate smart to ensure that climate interventions do not inadvertently exacerbate tensions. Sorry. So Dr. Ruttinger and Dr. Okano and myself discussed that integrating conflict sensitivity into climate policy is essential to prevent a rollback of development gains and to foster long-term social resilience. And we concluded that Japan and other regional actors should spearhead the development of regional climate security narrative that balances national security interests with a human-centric approach to development and peace building. So now we are on halfway, and we're going to start the day 2, which starts from plenary number 3, climate security challenges and opportunities in the current geopolitical context, followed by thematic number 4, realizing climate security through strengthening adaptation planning and other synergistic approaches, and thematic number 5, which concentrates on the impact of global warming on maritime security in the Asian Pacific region. And in the end, we have a small session about outlook about Asia Pacific climate security project, taking stock on the prospects. So I will hand over this microphone to Dr. Okano. Floor is yours.
Right, thank you. So we basically jump into our plenary 3. Thank you, Tsuraka-san, again for a very quick recap of what we discussed. Actually, it's a very substantive recap of what we discussed in the first day, and this helps me and help out to remember what we talked about in quite detail in terms of food security, energy security, and human mobility issue and else that are really pushing a challenging situation to the Asia Pacific countries. The current symposium meant to conclude our 3 years activity of Asia Pacific Climate Security Project. And of course, our investigation on climate security doesn't stop here, and we try to unpack the future challenges and what are the upcoming topics that we have to discuss in this important space of climate security in Asia Pacific. So this plenary 3, which is meant to be the final plenary session of this 2-day conference, is to really look at the outlook and where should we go from there, from here, and then lay down the broad context that further thematic sessions that are upcoming today will play in that context. So that's the general purpose, and I'd like to first introduce our speakers. As you can see in the program, we're expected to have Professor Yukari Takamura. Apparently she's running late, so let's see whether she could make it or not. And we nevertheless have a very distinguished 3 scholars, one on site and 2 online, as you can see in the screen. And please allow me to introduce my colleagues. So here is on-site participant from Australia, good friend from Australia, Michael Coppage, director and founder of Cotran Australia. From online, we have 2 distinguished scholars, Dr. Hen-Yu Kwan. Hello, I haven't met you physically, but thank you again for joining us. Who's Director of Security Studies Unit, Institute for Future Initiatives, the University of Tokyo. And last but not least, Dr. Uttam Sinha from India. Hello, he's senior fellow from the Manohar Parrikar, apologies for my pronunciation, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and analyses in there. I remember that you kindly joined the discussion 2 years ago as well, and I really appreciate that you again agreed to join us from India, and I appreciate your perspective from there. So today's plenary is meant to be a very conversational session, and I'd like to start with a very brief outline of what we try to discuss, and then we'll pose a couple questions to each speaker so that they will share their own perspectives based upon their expertise and experience. So what we want to think about in this plenary, as title suggests, is climate security challenges and opportunities in the current geopolitical context. As we discussed in the different panels and sessions in the first day, we really observed that the current geopolitical context is changing, where, for example, the United States is increasingly turning its back on the multilateral international order, and we really don't know what will happen in the international order itself. In Europe as well, her security issues have returned to the forefront amid the prolonged Ukrainian war and different geopolitical concerns. So what we want to consider is, under this changing and rapidly changing geopolitical conditions, what are the relevance of climate security debates, and what should we consider and think about this important topic to really advance and keep advancing climate action support in the region and maybe globally under different but very difficult conditions. So I really appreciate that we have 3 and hopefully 4 distinguished panelists that will kindly share your insights on this geopolitical context, their take on it, and also what kind of research and action that we can take in the coming years. So let's jump in with the questions, and I'd like to start maybe with Michael, the on-site participant, with the first question. So amid this shifting geopolitical dynamics, it seems to me that climate policies appear to be lagging behind, and it's very difficult to take climate action more progressively. So that's my view, but how do you initially assess the current geopolitical situation in relation to climate change? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Okana-san. And my thanks as well for the invitation to speak, and it's my privilege to be here and speak on this important topic. I'd like to, much as the discussions yesterday overviewed and referenced, refer to actually Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's comments at Davos this week, referring to and questioning whether we're not just in a period of disruption of geopolitics, but in a rupture of relationships and strategic partnerships. And I think if that's the case, and as we look at climate as overall within this broad scope of strategic interests between countries, both in the Asia Pacific and globally, then we need to reassess how we're approaching climate action, not just in terms of our multilateral institutions and engagements, but also in terms of our strategic interests and partnerships and how they align with climate. I think a really good example in this, for example, in referencing Prime Minister Carney's views on this, is that if our path forward among middle power countries in particular is to identify strategic interests on a case-by-case basis, sometimes with countries in which we agree, and sometimes with countries in which we have other disagreements or challenges and tensions, there are still opportunities to do this. A good example, for example, the United States, which is certainly not a climate-forward country at the moment, one I think can easily surmise, is still certainly impacted, particularly in terms of its military and defense assets. Those conversations don't go away regardless of their outward disagreement of engaging on climate conversations. So finding those opportunities and inroads to engage with partners like that, including, for example, around things like logistics and supply chain disruptions, those are critical. Equally, I think expanding and in reference to Mizuno-san's, I think, excellent description of global systemic compounding risks and how we need to go beyond looking at solely singular disaster events, to looking at things like global food price volatility and the impacts of those disruptions on global security. There are opportunities in that to identify relationships among like-minded countries to engage and build partnerships in the region. A good example, I think, from an Australia standpoint, is engaging with Pacific Island countries to help build a collective sense of resilience throughout the region, not just in terms of specific disaster response events and the more existential threat of sea level rise in responses in land reclamation, but also around helping to build resilience to economic impacts and looking at developing security partnerships and relationships as evidenced in the Falipili Union Agreement between Australia and Tuvalu, which is to Australia's interests on broad security terms and certainly also to Tuvalu's interests in terms of economic security. And it's by no means an uncomplicated or unchallenging approach. Certainly, there are wide human security factors and impacts, including in the Falipili Union, and it is not necessarily widely appreciated across the Pacific as a model for engagement, but it provides one example of this. And I think looking towards that future perspective, we do need to consider better understanding our mutual sense of awareness and risks from climate among and across and aligned across strategic interests, including economic security, including vulnerability and resilience of defense assets and relationships to respond to events, whether they're in the humanitarian assistance and disaster response space or whether they're in terms of cross-border and transboundary tensions in the years to come. And then through that, investing in that collective sense of resilience, I think is a part of that path forward to navigating this. So climate action broadly, but also climate action through our strategic interests on bilateral and minilateral and regional bases.
Thank you. Already laying out some comprehensive answer to the question, not just about the current situation, but also the existing opportunities and activities on the climate security in the Australia and neighboring countries. Right, I'd like to pose the same question to the other panelists to collect some of the more diverse perspective on the current geopolitical situation. I pretty much expect the different scholars see in a different way because this current situation is quite challenging and really difficult to understand. So I really appreciate your views from our online speakers. I would like to maybe invite Han Sensei first to answer the same question on how do you see the current geopolitical condition in relation to climate action. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Okano-san. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, clear and yeah, loud and clear. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join you in person, but I hope to share my thoughts with you as much as I can within the online context. So I think in terms of the current geopolitical situation and how it relates to climate change, I would probably describe it somewhat like the famous double helix of two intertwined strands that represent DNA, right? So climate change and geopolitics are both intertwined, right? And also stuck, unfortunately, in a worsening spiral at the same time. So let me make a couple of points here. So what are the consequences, right, of President Trump's withdrawal of the US from numerous climate agreements? So some observers suggest that it's going to be a straightforward zero-sum game, where others will rush in to fill the vacuum. So, for example, President Trump's withdrawal from the SPREP, the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. We have instances of media in New Zealand, for example, reporting that, quote, China has stepped in to fill the funding gap, unquote, with a donation of $200,000 US, which is precisely what the US donation would have been if the US had been involved. So this might be true in this particular case, but I think we should be careful because the situation is rather more complex than simply filling a vacuum everywhere. So I think if you look at China has its own calculations, right, based on whether it exposes itself in this particular case to disproportionate political risks. China also has its own calculations in terms of budget constraints. So China, we know today, is not China of 10 years ago. So I think there are instances where we can see a zero-sum dynamic emerging, but it's not across the board, right? So we need to be quite careful and nuanced in the way we assess, right, the implications of President Trump's withdrawal. The other point I want to make is that attempts to actually develop new technology, right, and renewable energy to reduce emissions have also fed, unfortunately, into geopolitical concerns. A good example of this, again, is China's massive drive, right, in renewable energy, like solar, and also, investments into building loads of EVs, electric vehicles. These have raised concerns about market access, for example, in the EU. Talk about potential tariffs on Chinese EVs being imported into the EU. And also, of course, raise concerns about supply chains for rare earths, metals, and minerals that are necessary for manufacturing the EVs as well. So all these issues are unfortunately very closely intertwined and interconnected. And the final point I'll make here is that climate change is exacerbating what we would consider to be sort of traditional hard security concerns. Right, so we've seen President Trump soften his tone on Greenland at Davos just yesterday, but the underlying concerns over Greenland, right, is not just about its strategic Cold War geographical position, where you have early warning radars that have been positioned actually as far back during the Cold War, right, for early warning of ballistic missile launchers that might come over from Russia, but that underlying hard security concern is also exacerbated by concerns about the melting ice. Right, the melting ice is said to be opening up the Northwest Passage more frequently to allow Russian and Chinese warships to appear more frequently in the region. Although Danish intelligence suggests that the Chinese warships have not appeared recently, but the worry is that as ice caps recede further, there might be the potential for more Chinese or Russian joint potential patrols in the region. And of course, we know that Russians have also fortified various parts of the Arctic as well. And not to mention, of course, President Trump also mentioned the potential access to rare earths and minerals, right, as the ice caps recede in the Arctic and also in Greenland. So what we see, unfortunately, is this overlapping, interconnected, interlinked drivers, right, where you have climate change exacerbating these types of traditional hard security concerns, but also connected, right, with concerns over supply chains, also geo-economic concerns over rare earth access and minerals as well. So that's why I think, to some extent, the double helix, which I mentioned earlier, which represents DNA, we also see increasingly climate change becoming part of the DNA, right? When we think about security concerns that we confront in the current period. So there's lots to discuss, but I'll just stop here for now. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Hansen, thank you so much. You laid down another comprehensive. It's a little different from what Michael laid out, but definitely it's related to many dots and points to each other. But I found that your intervention also echoed what we heard, especially from the day one from Michael. I mean, we have two Michaels, by the way. Michael Melling, that are also our shifting geopolitical concerns, US and China are definitely the key players, and with the different factors and different channels that they are impacting the current context. Right, thank you. So lastly, Professor Uttam Sinha, I'd like to invite you. So again, maybe the same question to you. So how do you see from your viewpoint, maybe you heard from different two perspectives, but how do you see the current geopolitical context in relation to climate change from your country? Thank you.
Well, good morning from India. Thank you, Okano-san, for this opportunity to interact. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, very clear. Thank you.
Well, I like the profound statement that came out from yesterday's deliberation that climate change presents a systemic security challenge. I think that really captures what is essentially happening around the world. The three geos, the geopolitical, the geoeconomic, and the geophysical, the interplay of the three geos is quite interesting, and I think also very alarming. Uncertainty, shifting priorities, I think are clearly defining the geopolitical landscape and what we are actually witnessing. And this is something I think we need to take into account, is the growing disconnect between the urgency of the climate crisis and what global politics is actually focused on. And today's geopolitics, and this again, I think is something that we need to really be alert about, is recasting climate governance as a domain of strategic competition, economic positioning, and power realignment. So, this is something that climate governance has always shied away from, but it is being drawn into competition and economic positioning and power realignment. While climate risks are accelerating and there's no stopping on that, geopolitical competition, I think, is narrowing the strategic attention. And major powers we see are now more focused on military preparedness, economic nationalism, and I think technological rivalry. So as a result, climate policy is being treated as discretionary rather than foundational to a long-term security. And in this climate of geopolitical topsy-turvy that we are witnessing, climate change issue risk being sidelined on the diplomatic agenda. And that's a deeply concerning trend, I think, which is something that we would need to analyze and put our heads together. Another important feature of the current geopolitical upheaval is the erosion of trust between states, whether they are developed states or developing states. Many developing nations, I feel, that they feel that the climate commitments have become increasingly selective. While on the one hand, mitigation targets are emphasized, promises related to climate finance, technological transfer, and adaptation support remains largely unfulfilled. And this imbalance, this lack of trust, weakens confidence in multilateral frameworks and slows the collective action. I think while climate cooperation will come about, I mean, it's not going to be the end of climate cooperation, but I think it is going to be shaped by strategic competition. Clean energy supply chains, for example, or critical minerals and the green technologies are going to be now viewed through the geopolitical lenses. While this can, on one hand, accelerate innovation, it also risks creating new forms of inequality and exclusion, particularly for countries that lack access to capital and technology. India's own assessment is that climate action cannot succeed if it is detached from development realities. And this is why India continues to emphasize on climate justice, on differentiated responsibilities, and pathways that balance sustainability with economic stability. So against this backdrop, I think there are two critical questions emerge, and I will end with these two questions. And this is something that we need to reflect upon. The first question is, how can international community sustain and elevate climate action when the very architecture of cooperation is under pressure? This requires some reflection. And the second question, to my mind, is what forms of diplomatic leadership and regional collaborations are required in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific countries, not only to address the existential environmental threats, but also to shape a resilient and credible multilateral order in the times to come. So I leave this with these two questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much from India, Dr. Uttam. I really agree that you point out that now climate governance or climate action is part of the larger picture of the strategic competition or the process, a rapidly emerging process for power realignment. The really convincing statement, and also you laid out already some of the action points, and that's a really good bridge to the, I would say, the latter half of our discussion. So from the coordinator's viewpoint, moderator's viewpoint, please allow me to, for the panelists, to group up I've suggested 3 guiding questions beforehand, but to group up the next 2 questions because it seems like we spent half time. So maybe you can spend almost the same amount of time for the next round of question, which I combine this way. So we have this difficult geopolitical circumstance, and you kindly provided some interpretation or some framework to understand it. So based upon that, what are the continued relevance or what are the upcoming trends of the climate security in the coming few years or maybe decades? So that's as a general question. So in the guiding question, they said that maybe we want to know what are the climate security relevance in general, and in this region of Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, what are the particular actions needed? So let's combine these two. So please elaborate your view on the remaining challenges for climate security, either research or discourse or practice, and what kind of impact that we can produce from the researchers' perspective. Right, so I like to go the same round, same order maybe. So I'll invite Michael on this question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do my best to provide as comprehensive an answer, and I think we're all aware that there's so much scope to the work that we could do in this space and the work that's needed in this space. But I'll do my best to provide my perspective on that. I think that from my perspective, I think that what's critically needed is still building that mutual awareness of how each country perceives climate risk and its effect on strategic interests. And I know this is somewhat repeating my earlier remarks, but specifically at a researcher level of being able to engage and build communities of practice and networks across within countries, but also across regions as a whole. I think that is kind of the critical step in action that's needed in this space. For the last several years, for example, some of my work has been looking at assessing risks around both Southeast Asia and Pacific Island countries. And this is a process that it's most beneficial when it's done in a participatory way. And I think, for example, the APCS program has done very good work in that sense of building those relationships and building that strength of partnership, so that mutual awareness and understanding not just feeds through the understanding itself, the analysis for reports, but also the relationship building and partnerships among and across institutions. And this is critical, especially in the period of geopolitical upheaval or rupture, however it plays out over the coming years, in the sense that it helps provide those really useful avenues for conversations when governments may again have periods of disagreement, particularly over transboundary resources or challenges that aren't necessarily affected by those proximate geopolitical factors, but provide answers and solutions when possible, when tensions reduce, or proactively by identifying opportunities to invest that are of maybe critical interest during and when windows of opportunity engage in the policy process. So when funds are available, when there is clarity of understanding among in-country experts and across regions to be able to provide to governments an easy answer of saying, we should invest in climate smart agriculture across this region because it will reduce future instability risks based on our understanding of future projections. And those messages, I don't think we can kind of underestimate how necessary it is for government to have clear answers on these things, despite the challenges of being able to be precise and be confident among the uncertainties of the science that we face. So I think that is critical. Equally, I think it's helpful and an incredibly important avenue to explore some of the emerging challenges and trends in climate and security, both including on the geoeconomic lens for the Pacific. Deep sea mining is a critical issue. It has substantial geopolitical repercussions. There are strong differences of views, and also during this period of partners withdrawing from the region, substantial opportunities for shifts in position that could affect significant aspects of the future access to critical minerals, or affect the biodiversity and ecosystem resilience of the Pacific as a whole, equally as well in terms of possible future responses to substantial risks in climate tipping points. Europe, for example, is being increasingly aware of the possibility of disruptions to the Atlantic current system, which would have significant repercussions for European countries, but also beyond that. And that is beginning to drive conversations around governance on geoengineering approaches, which we have very vanishingly few and solid answers on how to approach. And that's obviously just a small subset of the whole, but I just wanted to share those thoughts as areas to, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You read out very nicely what are the remaining opportunities, and also, yeah, I totally agree as a coordinator of this APCS project that we definitely need to strengthen network and partnership that we need to think together to address the question in quite general sense. And you laid out many detailed points that are very well noted. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn to Hen Sensei again with the same questions. So what could, I don't need to maybe repeat the question. So what are your perspective of the future steps for research and practice in this context? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Okano-san. I think one thing we need to maybe look at is, the use of terminology and concepts when we describe climate change and its implications for security. So if you look at, for example, Japan's 2022 national security strategy, right, it describes climate change as a security issue affecting, quote, the existence of humankind. Right, so the use of such existential language, I think is interesting from an academic perspective, and also for policy practitioners, interesting for several reasons. Right, on one hand, I think it highlights that climate change is a shared, common challenge. Right, it pushes countries and communities to work towards cooperation. I mean, if you think of it as an existential issue. It also highlights the urgency, right? The need to take action promptly. So if you look at this lens, this terminology of existential risks, there are already in academic context, there are a proliferation of research units, networks, initiatives. I would point to Cambridge University's CESA, Center for Study of Existential Risk, which is where I spent my sabbatical some years ago, which specializes at how we analyze risks such as climate change through the lens of existential risk, and also how to bridge those concerns with the policy and practitioner community. And then there are also more specific initiatives such as AllFed, which is the Alliance to Feed the World, where it really focused on specific issues, such as hunger. How do you feed people in the aftermath of a massive disaster, for example, right? So if you look at the concepts and terminology that we deploy, on one hand, you can see that the emergence of such existential terminology can nudge action to some degree. But there are also potential downsides, right? So on the other hand, and speaking with a range of practitioners and diplomats on this particular issue across the region and in Europe as well, the use of such existential language can be potentially seen as overly alarmist, right? It can also be counterproductive in a way if policymakers somehow perceive that the challenge is way too massive, right? It's too great. And there's nothing much that you can actually do given the potential scale and consequence and impact, right? And this could translate into, unfortunately, counterproductive outcomes, right? A sense of frustration, a sense of helplessness that, how do you address this really complex, multifaceted global challenge? So I think when we look at the concepts and terminologies that we use, I think it's an interesting angle, right? To look at, what are the concepts that we use? How can we translate those concepts into action? And I'll turn very quickly to your second question about, what are some key topics for research and practice that are ongoing in the region. I'll come back to the Australia Tuvalu agreement that I think Michael mentioned earlier and also was discussed yesterday. I think this is significant because there is a clear linkage between climate concerns and Australia's geopolitical concerns, right, in the South Pacific, right? This question of so-called migrants, climate migrants, right, under this historic agreement to allow 280 Tuvaluans to migrate to Australia per year. When you look at the number of people who actually applied just last month, I think it's more than 2/3 of the whole population of Tuvalu, right, applied for the particular visa. So how do you match demand and supply in this case, right? 280 per year is obviously not sufficient, right, to cater to this overwhelming demand right, for Tuvalans to move to Australia. And there's a related question here as well, right? How do you preserve culture, identity, dignity of Tuvalans, especially in the face of climate change, which might potentially erase, right, the physical environments within which they actually inhabit? That's a big question, I think. And as I said, also, this agreement is very closely linked to Australia's concerns about potential Chinese desires to secure security and defense agreements, not just with Tuvalu, but also other Pacific islands in the region as well. So I think this climate agreement itself is not just about climate, right? It's also very closely linked to geopolitics and also security concerns in the region. And this is, I think, a clear landmark achievement where we need to look at, how the countries in the region link concerns over climate change with concerns over geopolitics and also concerns about Chinese activities in the region as well. And I'll just conclude by looking at, how climate change has also become positioned as part of Japan's so-called FOIP, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Vision. So under former Prime Minister Kishida, he actually went to give a speech in India where he talked about a new phase of Japan's FOIP vision. And within that new FOIP vision, there was an emphasis on how Japan can cooperate with other like-minded partners, right, to address shared Indo-Pacific challenges. And climate change was specifically identified as one of those issues, right, where countries can work together. And I'd also point to the Asian Zero Emissions Community, which has also been a recent initiative by Japan, right, to assist countries in the region as part of net transition efforts as well. And this is actually building on Japan's long-standing record on climate assistance to the region. So this is not a new initiative at all on the part of Japan. It simply repackages what Japan has long been doing in terms of providing so-called green assistance, right, to countries in the region. And the final point I'd make is the impact on military operations, the impact on equipment, the impact on infrastructure such as bases, naval ports, naval docks, the propulsion systems that militaries depend on. And if you're thinking about, militaries having to reach net transition goals, it also implies that there is a pressing need to look for alternative propulsion, propulsion measures, right, to propel equipment. And so there are all sorts of questions here that also relate to how regional militaries, right, respond to climate change as well. It's an operational reality, right, for many of these militaries in the region. And also, if you're thinking about ever more frequent dispatches on missions for disaster relief in the aftermath of massive natural disasters, that's also going to have implications for training and also for readiness as well, right? So there's lots of issues, and I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hen Sensei, for again the very comprehensive intervention. Your arguments, in many respects, are quite convincing to me, and it's really appreciated that you're really linking actually to what we discussed in the first day, that we talk a lot about how do we frame the climate security or conceptual climate security could really guide our policy approach, as Mizuno-san's keynote and intervention talked about, and also of course those geopolitical tensions are closely intertwined, the climate change action spelled, but what question is, how do we preserve migrants' dignity, well-beings, and under these difficult existential concerns for the Pacific countries or those other vulnerable countries? Thank you so much for your intervention. So we're running a short time, but please allow us to eat in a little bit of the coffee break, because we want to hear a lot from Tom Sinha, at least almost the same amount of time from him. So please allow me to eat in a little bit to the break time. But okay, so Dr. Sinha, I'd like to invite you to the final intervention to this opening plenary of the day 2. The same question, so what's your outlook and what are the needed action and research in this difficult time? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just heard the two speakers before me, and very important points. There is very little doubt that under the present geopolitical circumstances, academic discourse on climate security has a particularly critical role to play, precisely because political consensus is weakening around the world. So when geopolitics becomes volatile and short-term, academia and research must provide long-term strategic clarity. I think that is a fundamental role of a research and the academia. Couple of thoughts that I have and I'd like to share. First, I think academic research helps depoliticize climate discussions, especially when we are in an environment marked by rivalry and mistrust. I think evidence-based analysis allows climate risks to be understood, not as a ideological position, but as a measurable security sort of challenge, right? So when you frame climate change in terms of risk assessment or early warning and systemic vulnerability, scholars can bridge the gap between environmental policy and national security planning. So I think that was one thought that emerged from the discussions. Second, academic institutions can act as platforms for sustained dialogue when especially official diplomatic channels are constrained. We have track 2s, track 1.5. These engagements become especially valuable in times of geopolitical tension, especially for countries across the Indo-Pacific, including India and Japan. Such academic networks certainly enable cooperation on climate risk without being held hostage to broader strategic disagreements. My third thought would be that academic practice plays a key role in integrating climate security into policymaking, and that has been stated, I think, by you, Okana-san. And this includes, I think, developing climate risk mapping, disaster modeling, and region-specific vulnerability assessments that governments can actually use and then strengthen the relationship at the bilateral level. In India's experience, localized data and context-sensitive research are very essential because climate impacts vary significantly across regions, communities, and ecosystems. The fourth view is that academia has an important normative role. It can help shape the concept of climate security in a very balanced way that avoids militarization of climate policy. So climate security should not become a justification for exclusion or coercion, but a framework for resilience and cooperation. And finally, I think academic discourse must connect global climate narratives with development realities. For much of the global South, climate security is inseparable from livelihood security or from energy access and economic stability. So research that acknowledges these linkages helps ensure that climate action remains inclusive and politically sustainable. So in this sense, the academia serves as a stabilizing force, I think. It preserves continuity, it helps build trust and provides strategic thinking at a time when, as we know, international politics is increasingly fragmented. But more specifically, and my final point to emphasize, especially in terms of India-Japan cooperation, I think the two countries have recently deepened climate collaboration through significant agreements. In August 2025, India and Japan signed the Memorandum of Cooperation on the Joint Crediting Mechanism, the JCM, under the Paris Agreement, Article 6 framework, if I'm right. So this mechanism enables joint decarbonization projects, technology cooperation, and shared credits that support both countries' climate targets while attracting private capital to impactful projects. So this is a space now that research can indulge in. Also, I think the two countries renewed a broader memorandum of cooperation in environmental cooperation, which sort of strengthens collaboration on climate change and circular economy initiatives. So building on these frameworks, I think India and Japan should prioritize joint research and innovation platforms on climate security, exchange climate risk data, and align academic exchanges that that bring together scholars and practitioners from both countries. And by doing so, they can help shape policy relevant insights, provide shared models for climate resilience, and demonstrate how climate cooperation in the Indo-Pacific can be both effective and equitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for many of the concise but very strong points. I agree with many of your points, especially your strong message that our activities and researchers should be really appreciating, connected to the development realities that we have, that are, the very important reminder that although the geopolitical context and the situation changes, the current reality of vulnerability in global south and different corners of the world don't quite change. So maybe our challenge would be, how do we keep this continued focus on the most needed support that we have to provide amid the difficult context to really continue this multilateral cooperation. So thank you. That's really rich discussion, and it was my great honor to host a wonderful panel. So thank you so much again for the online speakers from Hen-sensei and Uttam-san joining us. And of course, Michael came over to Japan to join our group and have a nice discussion with us. So I hope that this plenary had some insights to the future research activities that our team, as well as all the colleagues that are online connected, will learn in the coming few years to contribute to the resilience of the world, and also lay down the good context for the upcoming thematic discussions. Right, so with that, I'd like to conclude this panel. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much to all of panelists for such a comprehensive and well-grounded discussion. Next, we would like to move on to a break. We will be back at 2:10 Japan time. Please remember that the Zoom room will be kept open, so stand by. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. We would like now to move on to thematic session number 4, which is realizing climate security through strengthening adaptation planning. This session will be moderated by Dr. Prabhakar, who's the principal policy researcher of the climate change unit at IGES. He will be joining online. Dr. Prabhakar, over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for this opportunity. So for the next 45 minutes, what we will do is we will dwell into the realm of climate change adaptation planning and see how the adaptation planning at the national level and at subnational level, they can address the issue of the climate security. Now, since yesterday, we have been discussing various dimensions of the climate security. We talked about migration, food security, peace building, and then today afternoon we will also look into the marine related security issues. So there are so many, including the energy security. So given these all dimensions, we want to understand to what extent the current national adaptation plans and local adaptation plans are able to address these various climate security dimensions. Are the national adaptation plans themselves sufficient as policy instruments, or we need additional policy instruments to address these different dimensions of the climate security? So that's going to be our basic objective. To help us understand, we have a very distinguished panelists today afternoon. So we have total 5 panelists. So each panelist will have maximum 8 minutes. If you can save some time, that will help us towards the discussion at the end. The first speaker is Naoko Kimura. She is from IGES. She will present the IGES study results on the national adaptation plans using some case studies that we did in Sri Lanka and Fiji. And that will be followed by Nicholas Simon Taylor, who is coming from Global Green Growth Institute. They have been helping national governments in formulating the national adaptation plans. So he will provide us a perspective of the current state of national adaptation plans and how they can be strengthened from different perspectives. That will be followed by 3 national case study. First one will be by Kunal Singh. He will present the Fiji Pacific Community Pacific region perspective in terms of how the national adaptation plans are able to address the pertinent climate security issues. Ms. Sheetal Patil, she's coming from Indian Institute of Human Settlements. She will talk about Indian perspective of the climate security. And finally, we will hear from Professor Nandasiri Veerasinghe. He will talk about the Sri Lanka perspective of the climate security. So that is going to be our overall layout of today's session. Each speaker will have 8 minutes. So without much ado, I welcome our first speaker to introduce our study results. Now, Kimura-san, you can start now. You have 8 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Naoko Kimura, policy researcher, IGES. Today, the presentation focuses on how national adaptation plans planning can be strengthened to deliver stronger climate security outcomes. We look at how climate risks affect human and national security. What current national adaptation plans actually address, and what more can be done to move from concept to practice. Sorry, where is the clicker?
You can click on the laptop, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So today I'll cover the 3 main points. The first, how we should understand climate security while reviewing national adaptation plans. And then we just provide the findings from our reviewing NAPs submitted to UNFCCC. And then finally, we will show the ground level case study from Sri Lanka and Fiji. So current context demanding security thinking. Many governments are preparing national adaptation plans that focus on the risk assessments, adaptation actions, and capacity building. However, the links among adaptation, human security, and national security remain still unclear. To strengthen national resilience, adaptation planning must integrate security thinking. While some developed countries have already done so, but many developing countries, especially in Asia, are still at the very early stage. So here are the questions our research asks. First, what are the synergies and additional benefits between climate adaptation and climate security? And 2, what kinds of adaptation actions actually strengthen human and national security? And the 3rd is how climate security can be strengthened by bringing aligned stakeholders together, leading to greater security outcomes. So traditionally, security has focused on the military threats from outside national borders. Over time, this shifted towards human security, protecting people's livelihood, dignity, and well-being. The climate change is now one of the biggest international threats to human prosperity. Yet, this shift has also created gaps between the traditional security and security institutions and the climate policy communities. So climate security refers to the direct and indirect impacts to climate change on human security and the political stability. So climate change acts like a threat and a multiplier, as many presenters and the talks before yesterday and today already mentioned. So adaptation planning should not only reduce climate risks but also prevent future security risks. So hence, Here are the steps of our research took. First step is the review of the literature and the NAPs submitted to the UNFCCC. And the second is the country study cases at the field survey. And then finally, we come to the policy recommendations and the policy stakeholder outcomes. And here is the method. I would like you to draw your attention to the second and the fourth bullets. We reviewed the 67 NAPs review, 67 national adaptation plans submitted. And then with the keywords, keyword sets given in the fourth bullet, and using these keywords, we searched. Now I give the results of the review. So first, adaptation. The word adaptation appeared more than 11,000 times. While whereas the security appeared 948 times, which is only 80%. And this happens the 36 national adaptation plans out of 67 NAPs. So the most NAPs focus on the technical adaptation measures than broader stability, peace, or social cohesion. So this was one of the main findings. Sorry, I'll skip this one. We also found that the different regions or different countries have different security priorities, which is shown in this slide. For example, we see that Europe has Europe has covered climate security very extensively, while peace and the conflict and the migration in East Asia and defense in East Asia, which was not mentioned at all. So we just came. We also came to the correlation with the. We also compared the national security threats with how much NAPs discuss security. The correlation was very weak, mainly because very few countries explicitly link climate change to national security in their plans. And this suggests a major policy blind spot. And also we realized that the security threats index and the stress given on the national security in the NAPs had a very weak negative correlation. So is food security. Interestingly, countries with higher food security today to give less attention to further future food risks in their NAPs. So this raises concerns about whether long-term climate risks have been properly or appropriately anticipated. So quickly, time is limited. As the moderator said, I have only 8 minutes. So quickly go to the case studies. So we conducted the field survey studies in the Fiji and Sri Lanka. The main activities are focus group discussion and the roundtable structured discussions. And then now I will show you where the sites, study sites, 2 villages nearby Colombo in Sri Lanka, and 1 village nearby Suva in Fiji. Okay, so here is the step. We use the scenario exercises to understand how climate change changes people's life goals. Many participants expressed the fear and their children's future and the loss of farming, livelihood, and increasing uncertainties. So here are some photos. Here is the photos from Sri Lanka, the workshop, and the focused group meeting. A discussion. These are the photos from Fiji. So the results. So in the scenario exercises we conducted, we realized that the local community had a major feeling of a security deficit. And also, this is the result from Sri Lanka. I'm sorry. Here is another result from Sri Lanka, the very similar. And lastly, this is the result from the case of Fiji. In Fiji, the participants showed a mixed feeling. And as you shown in here with 4 bullets, these are the comments from the participants. They show they show some concern, but at the same time, they show very optimistic ideas about their futures. So we also held consultations with the policymakers and NGOs. And this is finally, the Sri Lanka's NAP addresses many climate risks, but does not explicitly frame them as security challenges. So there is a need to connect the national planning and with local realities and human security priorities. So in conclusion, to strengthen the security through NAPs, we need to identify clear synergies between adaptation and security. NAPs currently addresses peace and stability only indirectly. There is a major gap between national policy and the local experiences. Future adaptation planning must integrate a human security perspective and engage both. So we would like to send these messages here, and here, yes, still it needs to re-evaluation of the stakeholders' engagement thus far, who is left out, and then why and how to engage them in the subsequent revision of NAPs. Okay.
Thank you so much, Kimura-san, for such an excellent presentation. So we will move on to our next speaker, Nicholas Simon Taylor. Simon, you have 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. Oh. All right. Good afternoon. Am I audible? And are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, you are audible and we can see. Can you maximize the presentation into full screen mode? Thank you.
It is. And now?
Now we can't see. We see only you, not the presentation. Maybe you should go ahead with your usual mode. Yeah, that's fine, I think. If it is not working. Yeah.
It shows maximized from my end. Anyway, sorry. All right, so good afternoon. My name is Nick Taylor and I lead GGI's Adaptation and Resilience portfolio. We deliver national adaptation plans across the world in support of our country members. I'll just give you a very quick perspective on GGI. So GGI is the Global Green Growth Institute. We are an intergovernmental organization based out of Seoul in South Korea. We operate in a similar way to a UN agency. We're treaty-based, and we currently have 54 member states and operate in about 57 countries globally. So GGI functions very much with a focus on strong, sustainable economic growth and green investment. So the adaptation and resilience lens brought through national adaptation plans for us has quite an emphasis on using plans and policy tools to bring in investment and to bring in enhanced resilience across all levels of society and economies. I think like the other UN agencies or development partners delivering adaptation plans, we work very much following the UNFCCC NAP technical guidelines, but the emphasis over recent years, and especially since last year, has really been on developing NAPs which are more implementable. You would hope that NAPs are potentially easy for countries to develop and adopt, but we have done, as a number of other agencies have done, a couple of studies on the usability of NAPs, and we found that most of them had significant weaknesses in specific areas, so gaps either in the scientific basis, but in particular in the ability of the NAP to leverage finance. So the reasons for this are many. I won't be able to go into them now, but one of the primary reasons being that a lot of the NAPs are not costed, and the NAPs are not necessarily building in those interactions, in particular between ministries of finance and ministries of environment. So I think when looking at the concept of climate security, I think you can see, I guess, one of the primary challenges of NAP implementation overall being that it's really, I don't know, personally, I would say one of the most complex policy processes that governments, whether you're a developing country, a developed country, can follow. You're integrating as complex climate science, and you're looking to make policy and infrastructure and investment decisions, which are very much, reducing resilience, and then, and I guess in this case, enhancing security, ensuring that regional security, national security are shored up by the contributions of the NAP itself. I must admit that in a lot of the discussions that we've had globally, so we've worked in post-conflict countries such as Burkina Faso or Sri Lanka, a number of other countries, also in Central America, that we're seeing that the security argument is not super present. Like, I think it is maybe implied that a successful NAP, if it is able to build investment in resilience, if it is able to, in particular, for example, draw upon a participatory process, it is presumed that the outcomes of the NAP itself will be something that enhances national climate security. I will leave that to the security experts in the room to debate, but I would suggest that from the practitioner side, from the implementation side, the conversations are very much sectoral based. So are the national resources, are the water resources being shared? Are we able to reduce risk from the different climate hazards in these sectors? And then are we able to also, I think, draw integrations between the different needs of, say, the forestry sector, the agricultural sector, and the water sector. So in particular, in low income countries, these are the key sectors that we're looking at. So just a very brief kind of update, I guess, on where the global conversation is on NAPs at the moment. So 2025 was the year in which the new NAP technical guidelines were developed. So globally, countries have been following the 2012 guidelines, which were typically around 3-year processes. Most countries would access GCF readiness or GEF funding to then develop a NAP process globally. I think we're at around, I think the colleague before mentioned, in our high 60s, early 70s, in terms of numbers of NAPs submitted. In theory, the LEG, or the Least Developed Countries Expert Group from the UNFCCC, was asking all LDCs and small island developing states to deliver their NAPs by last year. This unfortunately did not take place, even if there was an increase in the number of NAPs delivered. So from our side, we supported, I think we delivered 4 last year. Angola Qatar, Samoa, and Sri Lanka. And they all represent, each one is an incredibly different process. So some of these were kind of rapid NAP processes, which were sitting on pre-existing policy contexts, which are very rich and which were already quite strong at enhancing resilience. Whereas some of these, such as Sri Lanka, so I think the colleague, the study of the Sri Lanka NAP, I think was probably on the previous NAP, because the new NAP had not yet been launched. It's will be launched in the coming months this year. But I think all of this to say that each of these different NAPs present extremely different contexts for development. But I think considering the quality and assessing, as the colleague did in Sri Lanka and as we did from our side with our NAP-GP, continuing to assess the ability of these NAPs to really build in interaction between ministries. So we're seeing, in particular, the NAPs are often sort of left in a bit of a corner with ministries of environment. The ministries of finance or the ministry of foreign affairs take little interest. So one of the key advocacy points for us is really trying to get those ministries of environment in the room with the ministries of finance and the ministry of foreign affairs to try and create a nexus point to help us realize that climate is very much a security issue, is very much an issue of economic stability, especially in these extremely climate vulnerable and also fiscally constrained countries as well. And I think the other one being that I think these NAPs have also been maybe too normative in the past. I think the experience that we had last year of doing some of these more rapid processes recognizes that some countries, here just a quick slide from Samoa, we're dealing with a country which has very strong awareness of climate challenges. There's a very expansive policy enabling environment in place, and then the financing tools that are really important for enabling finance to flow then would come from the NAP process. But then again, these NAPs don't necessarily have to be grand and complex in each context. Anyhow, there's way too much to say about this topic, but I will wrap up there. And thank you very much for your attention and for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Simon. I really appreciate your very comprehensive intervention. And sorry that we couldn't give you a lot of time. I fully agree that even in our studies we found that the current NAPs have not been fully participatory and have not involved many ministries and other players that they should be involving. So that we will be taking forward in our next presentations as well. So this presentation gives us a very good basis for moving on to the country case studies now. My first country case study presentation comes from Kunal Singh, working with the Pacific community. Kunal, you can start your presentation now.
Prabhakar, just to confirm, can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see, but can you make it full screen?
All right, let me just try doing that. Sorry. Yep, should be fine now. Right. Yep.
Unfortunately, I can't see it in full screen. Yeah, now it is full screen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Prabhakar. Thanks, everyone. I'm Kunal Singh. I'm joining from Fiji. Regional Climate Finance Advisor at the Pacific Community based in Suva. Now, my presentation is on the climate security considerations of Fiji and the Pacific, and I'll basically be talking about the experiences from Fiji, but generally touching on different aspects of the Pacific. Now, I wouldn't go through the to the country context in detail, but just to say Fiji has a world risk index of 6.7 and currently ranked number 15 in the disaster risk category, which makes Fiji highly vulnerable and quite susceptible to climate security concerns globally. Now, climate security is envisaged into Fiji's key planning document. It is planned to be in Fiji's key planning document, which is the National Adaptation Plan, the NAP. However, the NAP does not fully account for Fiji's climate security perspectives, as a fellow presenter has talked about in a first presentation. Climate security is framed more as a regional approach in the Pacific and not as a national approach at this point. So you won't have any country that has a national climate security policy. Mostly it's a regional policy, and the reason for that is because the Pacific tries to address these concerns as a region rather than nationally at this point. In Fiji, of course, the legislative framework, the Fiji Climate Change Act of 2021, recognizes climate change as a threat to the rights and freedom of all Fijians, which does identify a subsection of climate security as a threat, but does not acknowledge the full breadth of it. Now, regionally, climate security has been acknowledged by our regional leaders in 2018 in the Boer Declaration, which stated that climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security, and well-being of Pacific people. Furthermore, of course, there is a recent document, the Pacific Climate Security Assessment Guide, which gives a more regional, a comprehensive regional assessment of climate security concerns as a region, like I said earlier. Now, how do you link climate change and climate security concerns in Fiji? And like I said, generally the entire Pacific that I could talk about. On the slide on the left, you'll see some examples that I've given of very common climate security concerns and how it comes from impacts of a changing climate. And the 3 points there that I've summarized, it's quite important to understand that, because these are the basics of how a changing climate links to climate security concerns in Fiji, or any other Pacific Island country, right? And climate security concerns in Fiji arise mostly because of the increasing impacts of climate change. And like I said in my first slide, the changes and effects on livelihoods, land availability, disaster risk, and of course, relocation, displacement, and mobility scenarios, right? Now, the pressures of a changing climate further expose and worsens Pacific's fragile institutional structures, underdeveloped societies, and underlying social concerns. So the Pacific, and Fiji in particular, already has a lot of issues with land, a lot of issues with domestic violence, human rights issues. What the changing climate further does, it further exposes and worsens these concerns that are experienced on a normal business as usual level, but it gets worsened when climate change or changing climate further impacts a particular community or a particular district or the country. In a nutshell, Pacific Island countries, example Fiji and Samoa or Vanuatu for that matter, face growing security concerns from within. So there is mostly security concerns that countries face from within. Probably it could be domestic violence increases because of a tropical a category 5 cyclone that has affected a particular area. Or you could have an increase in crime rate because of a flood event that has, of course, affected a business district. So these are effects of a changing climate that affect a particular community or a particular area, and how it raises climate security concerns for the entire country or for that planet. For that particular area. On the other hand of it, once the changing climate has an effect locally, it further exacerbates our ability, or a country's ability rather, to respond more adequately to external shocks. These external shocks could be a war that's happening on the other side of the world, and how volatile or how vulnerable Pacific Island countries are to these external shocks. It could be a pandemic, it could be a war, like I said, on the other side of the world, or it could be anything from trade, from tariffs, from anything that could affect smaller and developing states like Fiji. Now, how a smaller and developing country like Fiji is trying to address this, and the major climate security concerns that have arisen in the country, and I'm happy to say there hasn't been a major one, but the small case studies that have been talked about are mostly related to climate mobilities, which is displacement, temporary displacement or permanent displacement, and relocation, which is why the country took really systematic and well-informed steps to protect itself from climate security threats. So, of course, it was one of the first countries that had a legislative framework to to address climate change, which is the Climate Change Act of 2021, and has been ratified and has now been enacted across all its ministries. Fiji also has recently launched its planned relocation guidelines. There has been relocation happening in the country, but this has not been planned or hasn't been happening in a systematic way. Now the government has taken a more proactive step and says, now we need to do it a more structured way, which is why the standard operating procedures for planned relocations has been launched. There's also a climate relocation of communities trust fund. It's called a CROC trust fund, which provides financial resources to actually relocate communities. But like I said, in a more structured fashion. Of course, there's been a lot of parametric climate insurance-based payments done by agencies such as the UNDP, UNCDF, SPC, SPREP. There has been a lot of priority put on risk-informed developments to make communities and livelihoods more resilient. So policies and practical steps to enact the national building codes, sectoral frameworks and national alignment processes. And of course, the last one is coordinating between DRR planning and climate adaptation. So I think my time is up, so I can't go into the detail of a case study, but that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kunal, and also sorry for restricting your time to 8 minutes. In our field visits, we also have seen a lot of messages that you have informed us today, and especially in a country where the mobility is a bigger concern, so that is going to dominate the climate security, picture of the Fiji and Pacific Islands. So going forward, our next speaker is Ms. Sheetal Patil from Indian Institute for Human Settlements. So you can start your presentation now.
Hi, can I request Kunal to just unshare his?
Yeah, he unshared it, yeah.
I hope you can see the screen.
Yeah, we can see and hear you, yeah.
Is it visible in a full screen mode? No?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I really thank organizers to convene such an important conference here, and also thank Dr. Prabhakar to have me here talk a case of India. So just starting with laying the frame for India, when we talk about climate security, we are not talking about a distant or a very abstract risk. Climate change is very on our face, already acting as a threat multiplier, intensifying all the existing stresses around livelihoods, water, health, and governance. India's scale here matters a lot because climate impacts are not experienced in isolation. They occur simultaneously across very densely populated regions, as we all know how India is populated. Heat waves, floods, and droughts now affect millions at once, turning climate shocks into system-level risks rather than, very localized kind of a disasters. These impacts directly affect the human and economic security through so many means. Kunal also talked about some pathways, and we also see in India about how it comes through lost livelihoods, declining labor productivity, and increased health stresses. Over time, they also place pressure on cities, and that is where I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the urban areas and densely populated areas, which increase risk of instability and distress migration. Importantly, climate security in India is not a concept purely about conflicts or a border stress. It is fundamentally a development and governance challenge. This is why national adaptation planning becomes so critical, as it offers a way to address climate risk clearly, systematically, and prevent them from escalating into security crisis. I just want to clarify here that India still not has submitted the National Adaptation Plan. It's with the ministry, and ministry has not yet approved it, and we hope that it comes through in the coming months. So looking ahead at the next 2 decades, India faces 4 climate risks that have clear security implications. First is extreme heat, which is emerging as a major public health and economic threat, particularly for urban population and informal workers, with direct consequence for productivity and health systems. Second, growing water stress that is driven by climate variability and groundwater depletion. It will intensify competition across agriculture, cities, industry, and increasing risk of social and political tension because of all those stresses. Third, the climate impact on agriculture threatens food security and rural livelihoods, particularly for small and marginal farmers, which creates conditions for persistent economic insecurity. And finally, climate-linked migration, which is mostly internal and into informal sectors, will place growing pressure on cities, straining housing, services, and local governance. Together, these risks illustrate why climate change in India must be understood not just as an environmental challenge, but also a core security concern that adaptation planning could actually address very proactively. Just looking at the pathway, climate risk becomes security concerns and how that happens, because they operate at a scale, occur simultaneously, and also intersect with inequality and governance limits. In India, climate extremes increasingly affect millions at the same time, as I said in the first slide itself. These risks are also compound and cascading, and that is where I'm going to talk a little bit about how National Adaptation Plan could address effectively these compounding and cascading risks due to climate change. Also, crucially, those already vulnerable bear the brunt because deepening inequalities and grievances also increase. That could also become a challenge to the security. And over time, this shifts climate change from a series of disasters to a condition of very chronic kind of insecurity. This is why the adaptation planning, I repeatedly say that, can move beyond managing just the hazards to governing long-term risks. As we see in this diagram, and it could fit very well as a case in India, climate hazards becoming more security challenges, not directly, but through the stress they place on the critical systems, which then translate into social impacts and over time, broader instability. As I said, India's current adaptation plan is pending with the ministry, but we have key kind of adaptation relevant strategies. It's not starting from scratch, for that matter, on an adaptation plan. Over the last few decades, it has built one of the most comprehensive adaptation planning architecture in this world, in the developing world. At a national level, they have a national action plan on climate change, which anchors key missions on water, on agriculture, on coasts and fragile ecosystems, each of which directly underpins the human and economic security. At a subnational level, at a state level, we have state action plans on climate change, which allows states to identify place-specific climate risks and sectoral priorities, recognizing that states are on the front line in managing the climate stress. India also has shown a global leadership in having their city-level heat action plans, which directly address the rising heat risks to health and labor productivity. Strong disaster risk reduction systems further prevent these climate extremes from escalating to humanitarian crisis. Taken together, these efforts already address many security-relevant risks, but they often have implicit rather than the explicit kind of a focus on security. That is where there's a gap, and despite India's strong adaptation architecture, which I showed in the last slide, there are these important gaps. First, many adaptation plans or the climate action plans that we have continue to treat climate risk as a sectoral challenge, as for just water or agriculture or health, rather than looking at them as an interconnected or a system-wide risks that can cascade across the sectors and across the regions. Second, the key security-relevant outcomes such as climate-linked migration or urban stress or informal livelihoods are often addressed only indirectly, if at all they are addressed. This has a limit on our ability to anticipate how climate shocks translate into pressure on cities, welfare systems, and the governances who are managing a lot of service-related kind of actions in the cities. And third, adaptation planning still focuses heavily on managing individual hazards rather than governing as a compounding or a slow onset event like heat stress, water scarcity, or livelihood erosion. Going ahead in the slide, what I wanted to really talk about is India's heat action plan. I'm just going to skip this and go to the next one, which has an example from one of the cities in Western India's state of Gujarat, which is a useful Indian example of planning for compounding and cascading risks, which is called as Ahmedabad Heat Action Plan. Here, extreme heat is not treated as a standalone hazard. Instead, planners recognized how heat cascades first into health emergency, then into productivity loss, and then finally into pressure on the urban system and governance. The plan links early warning systems with hospital preparedness, labor advisory for outdoor workers, and public communication targeted at vulnerable groups. Crucially, it brings together health department, disaster management authorities, labor agencies, and city government together for mitigating the risks. So by anticipating these cascading effects, heat action plan prevents extreme heat from escalating into the security crisis. This is exactly the kind of compound risk thinking that National Adaptation Plan can scale up across other hazards like water stress, agriculture, and migration. Just to conclude, India already has the strong foundation for climate adaptation, but strengthening climate security now requires very strategic shifts. National Adaptation Plan needs to make security relevant risks more explicit and move from managing individual hazards to governing compound and cascading risks. This also means that placing people at the center of adaptation by linking climate planning with health system, social protection, livelihood, and housing, and improving coordination across many institutions. I will just say a last sentence. As India, climate security will ultimately be delivered not through response, but through how well we plan for adaptation today. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me here, Dr. Prabhakar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheetal, for such an effective presentation. I really like the Ahmedabad example. Maybe we should delve into that in more detail later on. Our next presenter is Professor Veerasinghe. He is working as a team leader at the Horizon campus. So because our time is actually very limited, so I appreciate Professor Veerasinghe if he can limit his intervention to the shortest time possible. Thank you very much.
Right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the given opportunity to talk about the Sri Lankan situation. So as you see, presentation working now.
Professor Zibir, yeah, that's fine. Yes, thank you.
Right. So here I am trying to stress on the importance of integrating climate security into the agriculture policy, especially and the challenges posed by climate change to Sri Lanka's agriculture sector. So my attention is mostly to the agriculture sector. Sri Lanka is one of the most climate vulnerable countries. As you see, it is occupying the 10th position between 2018 and 2020 in the world, the disaster series. So that here you can see the disasters, especially like the flood, storms, earthquakes, landslides, and the epidemics are the major thing. But from the right side, you can see that now the storms and the cyclones are increasing exponentially. So that creates a very big threat, very big threatening situation to the Sri Lanka. So that has been experienced from the recent past. What you see there, the 25th December, that we got with this Ditwa cyclone. So that the climate forecast for Sri Lanka, if we say that the temperature will rise about 3.5 degrees centigrade, 40% of rainfall variability, then the sea level rise, and the extreme events will be about 250%. So that extreme events are very rapidly escalating. So that this climate change poses direct threats to the human security, economic stability, and the national security, increasing risks across social, environmental, and economic systems. So as I saw, the key climatic-related impacts include the water scarcity, extreme weather events, floods, droughts, cyclones, coastal erosion, sea level rise, food insecurity, health risks, and the climate-induced migrations. So these hazards account for approximately 96% of the disasters which are occurring in Sri Lanka. So with major impact from the flooding, landslides, extreme winds, and the prolonged droughts. So therefore, national adaptation planning must integrate climate security perspectives, taking environmental risks with human security, governance, and the peace-building processes, particularly in the light of the disasters that can escalating rapidly over the time. So here what is needed is strengthen institutional capacity and cross-sectional coordination with active involvement of the affected grassroots communities in decision-making and the implementation processes, as well as incorporate lessons from the Asia-Pacific countries to policy and practices so that climate security incorporated into disaster risk reduction, migration policy, and the regional cooperation framework. So just I will show the two disasters that happened in 2004, that is the tsunami, and the 2025, this Day2, where you can see the loss of about the damage of $1.45 billion in case of the tsunami, and the $4.1 billion in case of this storm. So this is the nationwide disaster here. This was only in the coastal areas in case of the tsunami. So that agriculture sector plays a pivotal role because with both highly vulnerable and it central to livelihood, food security, and economic stability. So here you can see that some of the data on about the agriculture situation. Dominant staple crop is rice. So it is about 1.1 million hectares. So that the tea, rubber, coconut are the plantation crops. But because of these disasters, all these sectors are really affected. So that here the land, the ecosystem distribution in Sri Lanka, there are about 32% of the forest. Then there is the paddy cultivation about 10%, then others are tea, rubber, coconut, and these are the things what you can see in the agriculture sector. So what is very important is that the Day2 impact eye-open for better plan in the agriculture sector. So that a cyclone struck during the Maha season, that means the major season, cultivation season, over 130,000 hectares has been affected, and nearly 10% suffering severe topsoil erosion. So then here you can see the resource conflict and social unrest. After the disaster, their food prices has been went up, so that we have to act on these things. In the displacement and human security, about the 1.4 million people have displaced and affected, and the critical infrastructure failure, right? Beach of towns and the flooding, then after this of the spill water from the reservoirs, a lot of damage in the downstream, so that with the build infrastructures with the big reservoirs, that will make a very big threat to Sri Lanka now coming climate change scenarios. So these are some of the figures what you can see from that what the Day2 disaster has been did that. So that is about the 40 million people affected due to this disaster, and a lot of infrastructure has been damaged, even including the railroads and other things. So the Sri Lanka's agricultural planning is weakened by fragmented institutions, inconsistent policies, underinvestment in innovation, and poor climatic integration. So addressing these requires a unified national agricultural policy, stronger institutional capacity, and investment in the climate-smart, market-oriented strategies. So when you're going to planning for the food security and agriculture resilience, so what is needed is a decentralized seed and input hubs. Even the departmental levels, in the sectorial levels, you have the seed banks, so that have the submerged and tolerant paddy varieties, so that immediately the people can get the seed varieties and other things to replant immediately within the season. Then they incentivize the protected cultivation, like these greenhouses and the protected structures has to be incorporated, protected agriculture has been integrated, and there is also the mandated disaster risk insurance to ensure farmers to replant with the same season after a shock. So what you need the livestock and human security, what we need the climate perspective, social safety net has been developed. So then the resilient rural connectivities and the sustainable livelihood housing. So these are some of the areas that has been incorporated into the policy planning. So climate security governance has to be increased to establish a climate security council. So create a high-level body that reach the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Environment, and Ministry of Finance. So this council would read wood and water storages in national security threats rather than just departmental issues. Then the climate finance that can be operationalized the 2025 National Climate Financial Strategy and the Trilingual Crisis Communication Act, which is the Tamil, Sinhala, and English. So these are something have to be incorporated into the policy decisions. So these are some of the figures what you can see that what happened with that the disaster, that the yield reduction in key crops, soil degradation, saltwater intrusion, overall threat on the food security, pests and diseases, and the water scarcity. So we have to build in the climate resilient agriculture in Sri Lanka. That means the vulnerable agriculture sector to the climate resilient agriculture. That we have to preserve rural livelihoods, foster cross-sectional food conservation, and ensure economic stability and the safeguard food security. So these are some of the major things that have to be incorporated into the policies. So climate resilient agriculture can be met with the crop diversification, precision irrigation, cascade tank systems, conservation agriculture, agroforestry, agrometeorological services has to be improved, support climate information planning, weather index insurance, provide the financial protection to the farmers, integrated farming systems, community-based banks, integrated pest management systems, and the farm organization. So these are the suggestions that can be incorporated to this planning. So that this is how the building climate resilience has gone through from the current status up to the final stage, that is the current stage, the fragmented, the policies. Then you have to strengthen the governance, boost funding, then the promote inclusion, and then the modernize the policies and come to the mature states. So these are the pathway that has to become with the development path for the climate policies. So with that, I think I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Veerasange. I really like that diagram showing from the larvae to butterfly, and that is how I think probably that very much pictures the current state of affairs in terms of the climate security. So without, from this particular session, what have we learned? I would like to present at least 6 points. One is that we have seen that the current national adaptation plans are not being effectively formulated, even in the current state of understanding, and they have not been effectively implemented. So that is what we have to, first of all, do it. We have to strengthen our adaptation planning, implementation, and designing. The second step is we need to move from the first year risk assessments limited to sectoral impacts to more multi-sectoral, cascading, and systemic risks. So we need to integrate these concepts into our risk assessment. Thirdly, we have also seen that we have to see that more additional players have to be brought into the paradigm of national adaptation planning, whether it is a national security, defense, or internal peace, law, and mobility related planning. All those things have to be brought into. That means that the new institutions and new actors have to be part of the national adaptation planning process, as well as the implementation. And since many of these security risks, they spill over the boundaries of the country, we also see that there is a larger need for the regional cooperation. And even if it is possible, regionally, geopolitically acceptable, probably one can think in terms of the regional adaptation plan that can fill the gaps between various national adaptation plans. That means that all these things have to be finally incorporated into how we identify adaptation projects. How do we finance them? what kind of monitoring, evaluation, indicator framework that we can bring into from the climate security perspective, that also needs to be brought into the adaptation planning and implementation. So that's what is my take from this particular session. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time, but if there is one burning question, we can accommodate for our speakers. If there is any one burning question from the room there. If there are none, then we can thank our speakers and thank you for your focus. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the floor now? No.
Well, thank you very much to all of the speakers for such enlightening presentations. We will now enter another break. We will change the time slightly. We will resume our session at 3:15. And again, the Zoom session will be open, so please stand by. Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Now we will have our final thematic session, which is thematic number 5, the impact of global warming on maritime security. This session will be moderated by Mr. Kazumine Akimoto, Fellow Emeritus at OPRI SPF. So, Mr. Akimoto, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Do you hear me? Okay, we have not so much time, so let me read out my prepared paper for this session's introduction. Our ocean-related team has been researching the impact of climate change from the oceans on security in the Asia-Pacific region since the opening of this study project. Global warming in the oceans is having various impact on the security environment in the Asia-Pacific region. For example, increased severe natural disasters pose a huge threat to living species. And population displacement caused by sea level rise will have a significant impact on the international security environment. Also, changes in the marine natural environment is giving a considerable impact on the function and performance of security and defense bases, equipment, further operation. It should impact on power balance and strategies. As for the Arctic sea lanes that emerge due to ice melting, if the international response is not adequate, it will make the global economic system and the balance of power fluid. Combined with the existing international security environment, including the hard security issues, these events will bring about a paradigm shift in the concept of classical geopolitics. Looking back on the past 2 symposiums, at the first symposium held 2024, we had 3 presentations. One was about the effect of Arctic Ocean melting on geopolitics in Asia Pacific. The second was the impact of climate change on military and defense. The third one was the impact of climate change on the security of South Pacific island nations. At the second symposium in 2025, we had 3 presentations. One was the impact of climate change on future security in the Indo-Pacific. The second one was the impact on armed and security forces. And the third was the impact of the warming Arctic Ocean on sea lane security in the Indo-Pacific. At today's final symposium, we invite 3 panelists. First is Ms. Julia Tass, a Senior Research Fellow, IRIS, and Dr. Miko Maekawa, Senior Research Fellow, Ocean Policy Research Institute, and Dr. Gunnar Lekvik, Non-Research Fellow, Sasaka Peace Foundation. They focus on naval operations, sea level rise, and Arctic oceans. First, I would like to invite Ms. Julia Tasse. Please, would you please?
Thank you very much. So my slide should appear, but in the meanwhile, I'll just introduce myself. Indeed, I work at the French think tank called IGES, and we've been working on climate security for a bit more than 10 years now. We started our first work on that topic in 2013, and we started working for the French Ministry of Defense, now Ministry of Armed Forces, in 2016. So it's been 10 years we've been working with this ministry. We were also founders with 3 other think tanks of a consortium called the International Military Council on Climate Security, with someone, Sherry Goodman, former counselor of the defense, the DoD in the US on environment. And she was the creator, the person who shaped the term threat multiplier. When we talk about climate change. And so for us, it's interesting to work with the military because, well, it's been more than 10 years that we are trying to get climate into security strategies. And it's very interesting for me to attend this event where we are trying to see if security is integrated into a climate strategy. In both ways, what we're studying in my institution is both the securitization of climate and the weaponization of climate. So how climate has become a security matters and how climate can be used as a weapon. And to echo the nexus versus concept presentation of Mizuno-san yesterday, I would say that we are more into the nexus part because, as you will see, we are covering many different topics interrelated. So very quickly, so the observatory is the project we are conducting for the ministry. And during the first part of this observatory, we really try to work on regional assessments. So we studied different parts of the world every time, working on IPCC and climate work to understand how it could be a geopolitical issue. And now for the last 5 years, we're working on thematic reports. So we've been working on health, on water scarcity, on humanitarian aid and disaster relief, as well as on an upcoming topic in France, the geoengineering topic, so how the modification of climate at a global scale could become a security issue. And as you've seen just before, we are trying also to mobilize both research fellows, but also high-rank military officers. So for example, we've been involving the Chief of Staff of the Navy, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces in France. So our aim is also for the global audience to understand that climate change is has security implications through the voice of high-rank military, because research fellows are sadly not enough when we talk about climate change, and it's nice to have high-rank military talk about that topic as well. So our work are shaped around 4 pillars that you can see on the screen. So we work mainly on the last one because we are research fellows working on geopolitics. But as a research fellow, I'm also working with the French Navy because my specialty is on maritime spaces. And as such, I've been supporting the French Navy in the implementation of security and climate strategy on the 3 first pillars, and that is why I'm going to present today. Just one word on the, let's say, how far France has gone in integrating climate into security strategies. So, as I said, the ministry funded a research program for the last 10 years. So that was just after COP21 held in Paris, that all the ministries had to work on climate. But this same defense ministry published a strategy on climate in 2022. So since 2022, all the operational parts of the ministry have to decline, have to integrate climate change into their practices. And as such, I would say that the Ministry of Defense in France is further advanced than, well, is in advance compared to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which climate security strategy hasn't been published yet and is still under discussion, and the Ministry of Environment, which has a notion of national security because the Ministry of Environment in France is responsible for the security of nuclear plants, but it doesn't have a broader climate security overview. Deep diving into how we work. So every time what we do is we take climate change impacts studies from the natural scientist community. We're trying to understand with the fellow researchers how it could have an impact on political destabilization at the regional level, and then we publish recommendation for the armed forces in France and how they could prepare. So those are example of reports that we published. So you can see that we've been working on ocean or adaptation elements. And one interesting topic for you, as you were mentioning adaptation, is that we're now exploring climate tipping points and how climate tipping points could impact armed forces. And the first work we've published is the one on the left, so on the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. So we've been talking about Greenland. The Greenland-Iceland UK line is really critical for submarines, especially for nuclear deterrence submarine. And now we've studied the impact of this climate tipping point on nuclear deterrence for the French Navy. So the first point is working with the armed forces on the vulnerability of their equipment and their bases, and it can seem quite artificial or like a small point, but actually, so as mentioned, on the very far right of the slide, you have the sea level rise and the risk of submersion of bases, but you also have all the risks that are linked with temperature rise of the ocean surface. So you could have overheating, and that is already happening. So most of the French Navy military ships have to choose between cooling system for humans and cooling system for electronic systems. And as you can guess, most of the time, we prioritize electronic systems, so humans have to work in really hot environments. You also have a lot of effects of climate change on navigation systems, both for surface ship and for submarine. And you have impacts of the biofouling, so the fact that you have more small organisms on ships as well. And we convinced the French military to work on that thanks to the work that has been initiated by the US. And this is, you can find it on the internet, but it is an animation normally where you can see how much of this infrastructure can be submerged by the sea. We've been also working on the vulnerability of people, especially with the pandemic. It really helped into exploring this topic. And the first risk is, of course, heat exhaustion and stroke. So we've been working on preparing military soldiers to abnormal risks of related to heat. And here again, the US working on that topic since the 1990s, we've used data that shown that for Marine Corps, for example, so it's still people working on ships, even though they're from the Army, there is a risk of heat stroke. And finally, and that's the main point, so I will finish up on that part. We're working on the impact on missions. So for the French Navy, it's really particular because, well, as many other navies, the French Navy is taking part in humanitarian aid and disaster relief operations. So it has to anticipate the fact that we'll see more extreme weather events. So it means that we'll have more mobilization of the Navy on that part. But the French Navy is also a fishing police tool because we don't have coast guards in France. So we're working with IPCC data on the adaptation of fishing police missions, and we're relying on this kind of study, which shows that fishing will migrate into places where people are less reliant on fishing for their protein intake, and so how geopolitical consideration can take into account fishing migration and the fishing police missions. And that's it for me, and I hope that I didn't take too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia-san. Nice presentation. And next, Maika-san, would you please?
Good afternoon. My name is Miko Maika, Senior Research Fellow at OPRI, SPF. Today, I would like to discuss the sea level rise due to climate change, and in particular, its implications of the international law systems in the world. Some of the panelists already have referred to the advisory opinion issued by the International Court of Justice, ICJ, in July last year. I would like to highlight the developments towards this result. It's pointed out that in recent years, International Court of Justice is playing multiple functions by going beyond the traditional role of arbitration and engaged in policy-making litigation, and also almost acting as human rights court. Also, as a scientific background, according to the sixth assessment report of IPCC, between year 1901 and 2018, global mean sea level increased by 20 centimeters. More recently, NASA observed the change in global mean sea level in 2023 relative to 1993, reached 9.4 centimeters, representing the highest level in the modern observation record that extends back into 19th century. The World Meteorological Organization indicates that since the start of the 20th century, global mean sea level has risen faster than over any prior century in at least the last 3,000 years, and the rate of increase is accelerating. Under such circumstances, series of multilateral efforts have been made in the past decades to examine sea level rise, relocation issue, human rights in the context of international legal system, first embarked by the International Law Association, ILA, starting in 2012, followed by the work of the International Law Commission, ILC, which is a subordinate body of the UN General Assembly, which looked into the issue of sea level rise in relation to international law, starting from 2018. And in 2025, this work produced series of reports with the final report by the co-chairs of the study group on sea level rise in relation to international law, issued the consolidated report summarizing the findings. And the report indicated the following conclusions. The law of the sea, statehood, and protection of persons affected by sea level rise are interlinked. Preserving statehood is tied to maintaining maritime zones and rights, which are crucial for economic stability, sovereignty over resources, and fulfilling human rights obligations. The continuity of statehood ensures protection of populations, preventing statelessness and safeguarding human rights. One of the central concerns is how to preserve existing rights amid sea level rise, especially for small island and low-lying coastal states. Legal stability, predictability, and certainty are key principles supporting maritime entitlements, statehood, self-determination, and peace. The report goes on to say that legal responses should prevent the loss of lawful territorial or maritime rights and uphold international law principles like sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and permanent sovereignty over resources. This body of work and negotiations during the examination by the study group informed the subsequent landmark advisory opinion on climate change issued by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, ITLOS, in June 2024, clarifying that states have specific obligations under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution from greenhouse gas emissions. The opinion emphasizes that these obligations, particularly regarding due diligence, require states to implement measures to address climate change impacts on oceans, including ocean warming, sea level rise, and ocean acidification. This was followed by a historic advisory opinion on the obligations of states in respect of climate change issued by the International Court of Justice, ICJ, on 23rd of July 2025, last year. In response to the UN General Assembly resolution, the court concluded that states parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change have an obligation to adopt measures with a view to contributing to the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change. States party to the Paris Agreement have also an obligation to act with due diligence. States parties to the Paris Agreement have an obligation to prepare, communicate, and maintain successive and progressive nationally determined contributions, which inter alia, when taken together, are capable of achieving the temperature goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. In respect of baselines, the court made the specific finding that provisions of UNCLOS do not require states parties in the context of physical changes resulting from climate-induced related sea level rise to update the charts and coordinate either their maritime zone baselines or the outer limits of the maritime zones once established in accordance with UNCLOS. And this was a significant victory for small island states and other island countries overall, including Japan. The court also highlighted that customary international law sets forth obligations for states to ensure the protection of the climate system and other parts of the environment from anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, paving the ways for non-party states to current climate laws also to be bound by the obligations to implement utmost climate change measures. Not doing so could constitute legally wrongful acts by states, which could be the basis for climate litigations, subsequent responsibilities of restitution, compensation, and satisfaction. This actually goes beyond the UNCCC decisions of separating liabilities and compensation for loss and damage caused due to adverse impacts by climate change. So states are obliged under international law to regulate the conduct of private actors according to ICJ opinion. Climate litigations are already taking place in Japan and also in Europe, even before this advisory opinion. I think it's important to use these legal tools to push for enhancing climate actions in respective countries. I'd like to also mention that there have been strong regional initiatives which drove this multilateral consensus building. These principles are expressed in the declarations, such as those adopted by the Pacific Islands Forum in 2021, 2023, the Alliance of Small Island States in 2021 and 2024, the Organization of Africa, Caribbean and Pacific States in 2022, and the Commonwealth in 2024. It is pointed out that states have begun to engage in regional and bilateral initiatives to address legal and practical issues that arise from sea level rise. This could also be seen as a case of so-called third world approach to international law vis-a-vis Western dominance on international lawmaking. I would like to also point out that regional courts have provided momentum for these interpretations, such as the decisions by the European Court of Human Rights in 2024 and by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights last year. As part of regional initiatives, I would like to also highlight the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility and the Australian Tuvalu Falapili Union Treaty, which has been mentioned a few times, as examples of regional ongoing practices. As a way forward, I would like to propose that Japan should continue to align itself with like-minded countries and regions to maintain the rule of law, predictability, and stability of the international legal system. And secondly, to promote science cooperation in the region for understanding the impacts of sea level rise and relevant mitigation and adaptation measures. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Miko. Nice presentation. And the last, I would like to invite Dr. Gunnar Lekvik. Gunnar-san, would you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Can you hear me? Okay, please.
Yeah, it is afternoon in Japan, but I'm saying good morning from northern Norway. Thank you kindly for having me. My name is Gunnar Ekvig. I'm a non-resident fellow at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. I will attempt to say something about how rapid climate change is reshaping and impacting maritime security across the Asia-Pacific region. The Arctic, we can understand it as a laboratory for humankind in the Anthropocene. The Arctic functions as both mirror and amplifier of the global system. What happens here in the Arctic reflects global processes, yet occurs at a faster pace and perhaps more concentrated. The Arctic impacts the global system just as significantly as the global system impacts the Arctic. So climate change is opening the Arctic at an unprecedented rate. Heating here is approximately 4 times the global average, but regional variations, for example, the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, is seeing heating at 8 times the global average, making it the fastest warming place on Earth. So this extreme warming is a fundamental driver that is altering Arctic geopolitics and consequently creating new maritime security dynamics. So inside this dynamic, we should also rethink the Arctic, not as a remote peripheral region, but as a bridge connecting the North Atlantic to the North Pacific. And this transformation has direct implications for the Asia-Pacific in general, and, well, Japan in particular. And inside this complex, China is formalizing this connection through the Belt and Road Initiative's Polar Silk Road. which in turn is linking the Asia Pacific to the North Atlantic via the Arctic in a, well, triangular constellation. So this represents a rather fundamental shift in how we must think about regional security, that the Arctic, it is no longer peripheral to the concerns of the Asia Pacific, but increasingly central to them. And, well, then with the war in Ukraine, the Arctic has been divided geographically into a Western, today a NATO half, and a Russian half. Consequently, the circumpolar scientific collaboration that has been critical in understanding climate change has been severely impacted. This collaboration had been ongoing since the Cold War, surviving even the most tense moments of that time. However, in 2022, following Russia's incursion into Ukraine, the 7 other Arctic Council members suspended all scientific collaboration with Russia. So this action halted a vast network of a multitude of projects addressing climate monitoring, environmental protection, even into indigenous people's rights. The Arctic Council, which had been today rather ironically considering President Trump's threats on Greenland, alongside his comments on the Nobel Peace Prize. The Arctic Council had been in 2022 nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize just weeks before the Russian invasion. So this council today sits rather fractured. The suspension of the council also represents an extraordinary paradox. We have stopped collaborating on climate change, an existential threat to humanity, because of a geopolitical conflict. The loss of Russian climate data, which covers half of the geographical Arctic, significantly impairs our ability to understand and respond to Arctic warming. Yet, cooperation is not entirely dead. Norway continues joint fisheries management with Russia today, despite these broader tensions. So this pragmatic approach demonstrates that even in the darkest moments, collaboration on shared existential challenges remains possible when political will exists. Parallel to the scientific dimension, we also have to understand the hard security transformation taking place in the Arctic. The Russian Navy is no longer primarily oriented to the North Atlantic. It has become a transpolar navy, capable of operating across the Arctic Ocean, linking the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. This shift has profound implications for maritime security from Norway to Japan. So these geopolitical shifts, they then signal the end of what we called Arctic exceptionalism, the belief that the Arctic could remain insulated from broader global geopolitical tensions. The Trump administration's threats to acquire Greenland exemplify this new reality and represent an unprecedented challenge to the sovereignty of the Kingdom of Denmark, a NATO ally and NATO founding member, with consequences that extend far beyond the Arctic, even to Japan. And here where these shifts carry real implications for Japan and existing in this rule-based international order. The Trump administration's approach to Greenland fundamentally weakens international law and established norms. If the United States can unilaterally threaten a NATO ally to surrender territory, what signal does this send, for example, in relation to Taiwan? What precedent does it establish for China's territorial ambitions? And what message does it convey to Russia as we attempt to negotiate peace in Ukraine? Japan observes these developments with particular concern. As an observer state in the Arctic Council and a major shipping nation dependent on maritime routes, Japan has direct stakes in Arctic governance and the preservation of international law and norms. The erosion of norms in the Arctic threatens the very legal framework that underpin Japan's security and prosperity. The opening of Arctic shipping routes offer potential economic opportunities for Japan, but only within a stable, rules-based framework. If great powers can simply seize territory through threats or force, the entire system of maritime governance potentially collapses, not just in the Arctic, but globally. The Arctic is not a remote region from the concerns of the Asia-Pacific. It is central to them. Climate change is driving this transformation, opening up these new maritime routes and strategic spaces. But our response to this climate emergency is being hobbled by geopolitical conflict. Yeah, I think for time I stop here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gunnar-san, from early morning Norway. Thank you. And we have 10 minutes more, so I would like to make a short question to each panelist. First, Julia. I know France has military bases in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean each. And as you may know, Japan has a free and open Indo-Pacific initiative as a cornerstone of diplomacy. What kind of cooperation do you think we can expect between France and Japan on climate security?
Thank you very much, Akimoto-san. So I think one first common ground is indeed to push forward the voice of the Pacific into the climate diplomacy arenas, and especially climate security diplomacy. For example, the invitation of French Navy to the Fijian Navy recently to talk together about the impact of climate change has really pushed this idea of existential risks. And it was really moving to hear the Fijian Chief of Staff of the Navy talking about his perception of climate change as the main risk for Fiji, and the fact that as a military it was really difficult for him to accept the fact that he couldn't act towards the main threats for his people. So that was interesting to support such voices. I think also that there is a French-Japanese comprehensive maritime security dialogue that we could enhance. And we could also work on more broad topics such as environmental security, not only climate security, but more broadly environmental security with biodiversity angles, such as, well, the fishing equation in the Pacific and IUU fishing, so illegal fishing. Environmental crime. I'm quite curious about the development of the High Sea Treaty protecting biodiversity and how it could require security actors to surveil and enforce the treaty. And finally, I would say data sharing. I've been working a lot on data, and I think that the fact that we are now lacking American data on environmental evolution and climate evolution require other stakeholders, such as France and Japan, to take upon this seat and try to, well, fill the gap in terms of data on environmental evolution and climate evolution in the Pacific.
Thank you, Jason. Nice suggestion. And next, may I ask you, Gunnar-san? And my question is, I understand that Arctic Council will not put security on the agenda. Isn't there a need for a framework for discussing security issues around the Arctic?
Yes, it's become a rather pressing matter to discuss this. The Arctic Council's mandate explicitly excludes hard security matters. This was intentional at its foundation in 1996, mainly to create a space for environmental scientific cooperation that would supersede, if you will, geopolitical tensions. Today, we can recognize that there are limitations to this approach. With the Arctic Council cooperation suspended and well, alongside security tensions escalating, we don't really have a multilateral forum for de-escalating Arctic security issues. I have proposed at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, the German federal think tank in Berlin, and to the Italian Society for International Organizations, the Italian Foreign Ministry's non-profit organization, an idea for establishing a Arctic security stakeholder roundtable. So this would expand engagement beyond the Arctic 7+1, including states like Italy, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, so on, stakeholders in the Arctic, non-Arctic actors. The middle powers, if you will. Such a framework could address trans-Arctic security challenges that link the North Pacific to the North Atlantic, that link these two distinct regional security complexes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good comment. And then, Maika-san, may I ask you, what is the role for Japan can play in responding to climate security issues in Asia Pacific?
Thank you very much for the question. I would like to point out three aspects for Japan to enhance climate security. First is to continue to pursue comprehensive security, and second is to value human security as a sort of basis for Japanese diplomacy, and third is to promote regional cooperation. So first on comprehensive security, I think it's important to first enhance existing climate change policies and measures. And in addition, I think it's important to fill the existing gaps. For instance, to fill the gap between humanitarian assistance and development efforts and so on, linking adaptation, transformative adaptation to loss and damage, etc. So there are still gaps to be filled out, and so pursuing comprehensive security, I think very much is in line with towards this direction. And secondly, on human security, I think Japanese approach should be very much bottom up, and to build on existing climate cooperation in the region. Especially Japan is one of the top donors in disaster risk management in the region. And I think it's important to avoid climate issue becoming too politicized. I think it's important to learn from the experiences in the US and in Europe, where climate change has become such a polarizing issue to some extent. And in Asia and Pacific, for example, China, India, both expressed at the UNGA not to deal with climate issues in the security context. So in the Asian context, it might be more constructive to sort of build on existing environmental cooperation framework and also to follow national strategies and thinking of partner countries, as I mentioned. And for China and India, for example, their interests are very much domestic, addressing domestic issues and responding to disasters and so on. And I think this sort of leads to enhancing regional cooperation. And as Mizuno-san has mentioned, climate security is not just a matter for Japan, but for multiple countries, bringing benefits to multiple countries in the region. And by enhancing those efforts, Japan should continue to work on building trust, in the end, enhancing climate security in the region. And so, Akimoto-san, I would like to put back a question to you as a final comment. In the policy brief that we're about to publish as part of this joint research, you pointed out a recommendation to build a security cooperation framework between countries that share the national interests of Europe and the Indo-Pacific. Could you please elaborate on this point?
Okay, I'm now a moderator today, so I don't want to talk a lot, but as my view, Arctic Sea lane surely connect Atlantic and the Pacific more deeply than the sea lane passing Indian Ocean. So building overall security cooperative framework between Euro-Atlantic and Asia-Pacific region should be needed. This is my suggestion. Thank you very much. Is it okay? Thank you. And it's just time to close. So may I close this session?
All right, thank you very much. And just before we finish today's agenda, I would like to invite Dr. Kei Kurushima, Chief Policy Researcher at IGES. She will give us an outlook of the APCS taking stock and prospects. So Kurushima-san, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you very much, Guillermo-san, for the introduction. So for this last session, firstly, on behalf of the organizer, Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, IGES, I would like to appreciate everyone who participated and registered for this event. And also, I would like to thank the co-organizer, Institute for Future Initiatives, IFI, at the University of Tokyo, and also the research collaborator of the project, Ocean Policy Research Institute, or PRI, of Sasakawa Peace Foundation, who have been working with us in this project for 3 years. And of course, the great appreciation goes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan for the support for conducting 3-year climate security project under the subsidy for the research and study projects on the diplomacy and security. So for this final session, I would like to be very brief. I would like to wrap up the discussion and outline the way forward and for strengthening climate security dialogue in the Asia-Pacific region. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so this event was a 2 days international symposium called Climate Security in the Asia Pacific under a shifting geopolitical context. And this is a photo we took yesterday after the half-day symposium. And we had more than 30 participants joining in person in the beautiful venue at IFI of University of Tokyo. And also we had 1,024 registrations for the entire 2 days symposium who showed interest in climate security and specific thematic areas that we have presented. Okay, so this is key takeaways from the workshop. So we had 3 plenary sessions. So it's very difficult to like summarize. So in this very fruitful discussions, but I summarize each of the session in 1 point, 1 sentence. So I began with Mizuno-san's presentation on conceptualizing of climate security, and he pointed out that this concept is fragmented across different sectors and actors, and disciplined, systematic, and evidence-based policy framework is needed. And at the end of yesterday's symposium, the session was held, and the discussion was to achieve regional peace. Japan and other actors should move beyond traditional military security toward an integrated framework that prioritizes environmental stability and human-centric development. And the first session of today, the researchers discussed climate change is no longer solely an environmental concern, but an operational reality with direct national security implications, further complicated by the evolving geopolitical dynamics, such as between China and the United States. And also, in these 2 days, we had 5 thematic sessions, which were held to discuss the intricate risk multiplier effect of climate change on energy, mobility, food systems, climate change adaptation, and maritime security. So I won't go to deep details of the sessions, but beyond the essential initiative for the global and Indo-China regions, the thematic sessions discussed the climate security, emphasizing the need to integrate the impact of climate change into national policies and strategies while addressing community-level vulnerabilities and risks. Okay, so in this March, it will be the concluding of this 3-year project under the support of MOFA. And this is just a figure that we developed in the first year application stage of this project, and we have been working for this under this figure. So basically, we had 5 thematic working group: energy, food, migration, adaptation, and oceans. And we took this research into multi-layer security environments from international security, regional security, national security, and human security. And each of the thematic groups have been working in different security arenas. And we were able to compile the research result into the climate security of Indo-Pacific regions. And also in this research project, we were able to establish networks of climate security, not only in Asia Pacific. Of course, we have been working closely with many institutions in Asia Pacific, but we also have established networks in Europe and also in United States, Canada as well. And of course, Australia and New Zealand. And So for us way forward, taking stock of the 3-year APCS project, research across multiple climate-related security themes together with regional initiative focused on the Indo-Pacific has strengthened climate security capacity among individual researchers and participating institutions. And also we have produced many research outputs and policy recommendations for the climate security of the region. And as a way forward, to ensure that work on climate security continues beyond the project's 3-year timeframe, it is essential to remain responsive to evolving geopolitical dynamics while deepening analysis of how climate change affects security in the Asia-Pacific, particularly in relations to Japan. And moreover, although the project was structured around 5 thematic areas in this period, effective collaboration across these 5 themes is critical. And I was in charge of the food security sub-themes. And within this food security, there was many issues involved, like food, energy, water, land, and human mobility. And these different topics are interconnected. So by linking these diverse themes, we can better understand climate change as a risk multiplier for security issues. So I would like to promote this upcoming Asia-Pacific Climate Security Policy Report Series that, of course, Okano-san has introduced yesterday. So as I said, there are 5 thematic groups for this research project, and each of the sub-themes has developed one policy report, and we made it into a series. And these will be published soon in February 2026 on the APC web page. And also, the proceedings of this today's symposium will be also published soon on the APC web page. And for now, I just put the past proceeding of the past symposium. So if you're interested, please access our web page. And we have both English and Japanese versions. So please check the proceedings as well. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. And thank you very much once again for joining our symposium today. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kurushima. So yes, this brings our 2-day symposium to an end. We would like to thank all the participants and speakers who made the time to participate for their insightful contributions, and to everyone who joined from all parts of the world. We hope that you keep supporting the work of IGES and our partners, and to see you in future events. And again, today, as you leave the Zoom session, a survey will appear on your screen, and we would be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to answer it, as we really appreciate your feedback. So that will be all from me. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Thank you.